Imagine a city swallowed by fog, where the gas lamps hiss in the dark, and the only sound is the echo of your own footsteps on the wet cobblestones. Tonight, we travel back to the shadows of Victorian London, not for the scream, but for the silence. We will walk the streets of 1888, drifting through the smoke and the mystery. It is dark, it is heavy, and it is perfectly boring. Close your eyes. Let the history of the night put you to sleep. The city of London does not simply fall asleep. It is slowly smothered by the heavy breath of the river, a descent into a world where the sharp edges of the day are worn down by the creeping damp of the evening. To understand the Victorian night, you must first understand the fog, that legendary pale shroud that does not merely hang in the air, but seems to possess a life of its own, rolling in off the Thames like a great gray ocean tide that has forgotten how to retreat, swallowing the cobblestones and the spires and the very sound of your own footsteps. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the embankment, where the iron railings are cold and slick with moisture, and looking out into a void that should be a river, but tonight it is only a swirling wall of vapor, a thick and yellowing mist that tastes of coal smoke and ancient water, sitting heavy on the tongue and filling the lungs with the raw essence of the city. The gas lamps have flickered to life, one by one, ignited by the lamplighters who move like ghosts through the gloom. But their light does not travel far. It is trapped within a halo of amber, a small sphere of illumination that struggles against the overwhelming weight of the smog, casting long and dancing shadows that stretch and twist across the wet pavement. In this world, distance is an illusion. Buildings that are towering giants by day become mere suggestions of shape, looming suddenly out of the darkness only when you are nearly upon them. Their brick facades weeping with condensation, the mortar black with the soot of a million chimneys that have burned through the winter days. There is a silence here that is unnatural, a muffled quality to the air, as if the fog has wrapped the entire city in wool, stealing the echo of the carriage wheels and the clip-clop of the horses, so that when a hansom cab emerges from the mist, it appears silently, like a phantom vessel drifting on a dark sea. The driver hunched low in his coat, his face obscured by the brim of his hat and the upturned collar, a solitary figure navigating the endless gray. The Thames itself is silent. The great artery of the empire has slowed its pulse, the water moving sluggishly beneath the shroud, black and oily and deep, hiding the secrets of the day beneath a surface that reflects nothing but the void above, and occasionally the mournful sound of a foghorn drifts from downriver, a deep and resonant bellow that vibrates in your chest. A lonely call from a barge captain trying to find his way to the docks without sight, guided only by instinct and the shifting currents. Walking through these streets feels like walking through a dream, where time has no meaning and the familiar landmarks are lost. The great dome of St. Paul's is gone, erased by the white wall. The Tower of London is nothing but a darker patch of night, and you are left alone with your thoughts, wrapped in the cool embrace of the moisture that clings to your coat and settles on your skin. It is a time for reflection, for the slowing of the heart, for letting go of the urgency that drives the daylight hours. Because in this fog, you cannot rush, you cannot run, you can only move with caution and deliberate slowness, placing one foot before the other on the slick stones, trusting that the road will continue even though you cannot see it. The air smells of ozone and wet earth, of the distant sea and the burning hearths of the crowded row houses, a complex perfume of humanity and nature colliding in the damp chill. And as you breathe it in, you feel a heavy drowsiness, a hypnotic pull that urges you to close your eyes and let the world fade away, just as the city has faded into the mist. In the distance, The muffled chime of Big Ben strikes the hour, the sound dull and flat as it pushes through the density of the air, counting down the time not for the waking, but for the sleeping, a rhythm that syncs with the slow beating of your own heart. The shops are shuttered and barred, their displays hidden behind heavy wood and iron. The bustling markets are empty, leaving only the scattered debris of the day. A discarded newspaper blowing lazily across the street, a crate left by a grocer, all of it softening under the layer of dew that forms on every surface. To be out in this weather is to be invisible, a shadow moving among shadows, and there is a strange comfort in that anonymity, a sense of safety in being hidden from the prying eyes of the world, wrapped in a blanket that nature has spun from water and smoke. The river is the source of it all, the great mother of the mist, breathing out the cold air that meets the warmth of the city, creating this alchemy of atmosphere that transforms the grime and the poverty and the grandeur into a single, unified shade of gray, where a palace looks no different than a warehouse, and a king is just as blind as a beggar. You might pass a stranger on the street, a dark silhouette approaching from the void, and you will not see their face until they are arm's length away. A brief moment of recognition, a nod of the head, and then they are gone again, swallowed back into the silence, leaving you to wonder if they were ever really there at all, or if they were just a figment of the tired mind. The gaslights hum with a low, steady buzz, a sound you can only hear if you stand directly beneath them, a comforting mechanical lullaby that speaks of the invisible energy flowing through the pipes beneath the street, keeping the darkness at bay in tiny, isolated circles of warmth. Even the stray dogs have found shelter, curled up in the dry corners of alleyways, their breathing slow and rhythmic, noses tucked under tails to preserve warmth, instinctually understanding that this is a night for stillness, for conserving energy, for waiting out the heavy hand of the atmosphere. The moisture gathers on the iron railings of the bridges, forming perfect, heavy droplets that hang suspended for a moment before falling silently into the river below, joining the black water in its journey to the sea, a cycle of water and air that has repeated for centuries in this old city. The brickwork of the houses seems to exhale the cold. The windows are dark, the curtains drawn tight against the gloom. Families gathered around the last embers of the fire, their world shrunk down to the size of a single room, while outside, the great smog claims dominion over everything else. It is a peaceful invasion, this arrival of the fog. It does not storm the gates with wind and fury, it simply arrives, settling into the hollows and the valleys of the streets, filling the spaces between the buildings, softening the hard angles of the architecture, turning the sharp reality of steel and stone into a watercolor painting that has been left out in the rain. As you walk, the rhythm of your own breath becomes the loudest sound in the universe, a slow inhalation of the cool, damp air, and a long exhalation that joins the mist, adding your own small cloud to the pale shroud that covers the world. There is no horizon, no sky, no ground. Only the immediate bubble of existence around you. A floating sensation that disconnects you from the worries of tomorrow and the regrets of yesterday, leaving you suspended in the eternal now of the fog. The barges on the river are moored tight, their ropes creaking softly as the tide shifts, the water lapping gently against the wooden hulls, a rhythmic slapping sound that is hypnotic and repetitive, like the ticking of a slow clock. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blows, a lonely and melancholic sound that is stretched thin by the distance and the density of the air, a reminder that there is a world beyond this gray cocoon, but it feels light years away, disconnected and irrelevant to the peace of this moment. The fog is a heavy blanket, a protector of sleep, weighing down the eyelids, pressing gently on the shoulders, whispering that it is time to rest, time to stop moving, time to let the mind drift like the vapor itself. The colors of the day are gone, replaced by the monochrome palette of the night, shades of charcoal and slate and pearl, a visual silence that rests the eyes and calms the spirit. You are walking through history, breathing the same air that Dickens breathed, seeing the same shadows that have haunted these streets for generations. But tonight there is no fear, only a deep and abiding stillness, a sense that the city is holding its breath, waiting for the dawn that seems impossibly far away. The streetlights are like islands in a sea of gray, stepping stones that guide you deeper into the dream, each one promising a moment of clarity before you plunge back into the unknown, a journey that mirrors the drift into sleep itself, moving from thought to thought, from image to image, until everything dissolves into the soft, welcoming darkness. The dampness on your face feels clean and cool, a refreshing touch that washes away the dust of the day, grounding you in the physical sensation of the moment while your mind begins to float free. The city sleeps under its pale shroud, a giant resting in the quiet, and you are part of that rest, a small, silent observer moving through the veins of the sleeping metropolis, guarded by the fog, hidden by the night, safe in the slow, rhythmic breathing of the world. The river flows on, the fog holds tight, and the silence deepens, layer upon layer, until there is nothing left but the peace of the heavy, hanging air. As the white wall of the river fades behind us, we drift inland, carried by the damp air into the tangled veins of the East End, where the silence changes texture, becoming heavier, denser, filled with the unseen presence of thousands of sleeping souls. To enter the rookeries is to step into a world within a world, a labyrinth of brick and timber that has grown upon itself over the centuries, layer upon layer, until the buildings lean toward each other across the narrow alleys, as if whispering secrets in the dark. The ground here is uneven, the cobblestones worn smooth by the passage of countless feet, slick with the eternal moisture that seems to seep from the very bones of the city. And as you walk, the echo of your steps is short and deadened, absorbed instantly by the towering walls that rise up on either side. There is no horizon here, no sense of distance, only the immediate reality of the architecture that presses in, blocking out the wind and trapping the stillness, creating a pocket of air that feels old and used and heavy with the memories of the day. The gas lamps are fewer here, the pools of light more distant and dim, leaving vast stretches of shadow where the darkness is absolute, a thick velvet blackness that hides the cracks in the walls and the sag in the roofs, smoothing over the scars of poverty with a gentle hand. You can feel the weight of the population, the sheer density of life packed into these tenements. Yet tonight, under the spell of the late hour, there is a profound peace, a suspension of the struggle that defines the daylight hours. Behind the blackened windows and the thin curtains, families are huddled together for warmth, their breathing sinking in the quiet rooms, a collective exhalation that warms the air and gives the neighborhood a living, rhythmic pulse. These are the hives of the industrious poor, the workers who fuel the empire, and now, in the deepest part of the night, they have claimed their reward, the simple, necessary mercy of sleep. The wooden shutters creak softly in the stillness, shifting with the settling of the houses, a sound that is as natural and organic as the rustling of leaves in a forest, reminding you that these buildings are alive in their own way, groaning under the weight of history. As you navigate the winding passages, you pass under low arches that feel like tunnels, the damp stone brushing against your shoulder, leading you deeper into the maze where the air smells of wood smoke and damp wool and the faint, earthy scent of tea leaves. Above you, Washing lines crisscross the narrow gap of the sky, draped with clothes that hang motionless in the stagnant air, like flags of truce surrendered to the night, their shapes ghostly and pale against the dark brick. There is a sense of protection here in the closeness, a feeling that the city is wrapping its arms tight around its most vulnerable children, shielding them from the cold expanse of the open world, keeping the heat of life contained within these narrow canyons. Occasionally, a faint glow appears in a high window, a single candle burning low, perhaps a mother tending to a child or a scholar of the streets unable to rest, and that tiny point of amber light serves as a beacon, a reminder of the enduring human spirit that persists even in the deepest shadows. The rookeries are a place of texture, of rough brick and splintering wood, of iron railings that have rusted into sharp points. And in the dark, your senses become attuned to these details. The way the ground slopes toward the gutter, the way the air grows cooler as you pass an open cellar door. It is a place where privacy is a luxury. Yet tonight, the night has granted everyone their own private kingdom of dreams, separating the soul from the hardship of the reality, allowing the mind to wander far beyond the confines of the East End. You are moving through a dormitory of the giant city, walking softly so as not to disturb the weary, feeling a sense of reverence for the sheer endurance of the life that surrounds you. The noise of the great metropolis does not reach this deep into the slums. The roar of the factories and the clatter of the carriages are miles away, leaving only this heavy, blanketed silence that feels almost sacred. In the absence of light, the imagination takes over, filling the shadows with the stories of the people who live here, the dockworkers and the seamstresses, the costermongers and the sweepers, all of them equal now in the democracy of sleep. The fog that rolled off the river has found its way here too, but it is thinner, wispy strands that cling to the eaves and the chimney pots, softening the jagged skyline, blurring the harsh edges of the rooftops against the moonless sky. There is a hypnotic quality to the repetition of the doors and the windows, row after row of identical openings, a pattern that lulls the eye and calms the mind, creating a sense of order within the chaos of the overcrowding. You pause at a corner, looking down a long, dark alley that seems to stretch into infinity, and you realize that this darkness is not empty. It is full of rest, full of the recharging energy that will be needed when the sun rises. The dampness here brings out the smell of the old city, a scent of wet stone and coal dust that is strangely comforting, a smell that speaks of permanence and survival. Even the stray cats move with a slow, deliberate grace, hugging the walls, their eyes catching the faint light before they slip silently through a broken fence, masters of this hidden domain. The atmosphere is thick, almost palpable, as if you could reach out and touch the quiet, pushing your hand through the stillness like water. It is a slow-motion world, where time drags its feet, where the minutes stretch into hours, giving you permission to let go of your own urgency, to match your pace to the slow, steady heartbeat of the slumbering streets. The poverty is hidden by the night, the peeling paint and the broken glass obscured, leaving only the shapes and the shadows, the abstract forms of a city at rest. You feel a deep connection to these sleeping strangers, a shared humanity that transcends station and class, a realization that in the end, we all seek the same comfort, the same oblivion of the night. The path leads you past a small, enclosed courtyard, where a single tree struggles toward the light, its bare branches etched black against the gray wall, a symbol of resilience that stands silent watch over the residents. The silence is not fearful, it is restorative, a heavy pause in the sentence of time, a deep breath taken by the city before it must speak again. You continue your drift through the abyss, not as an intruder, but as a witness to the peace that can be found even in the hardest of places, a peace that settles like dust on the windowsills and the door frames. The darkness is a soft embrace, wrapping around you, slowing your thoughts, heaviness settling behind your eyes, urging you to join the thousands around you in the dark, to lay down your burden and surrender to the quiet. The walls seem to hum with a low vibration, the resonance of the city's slumber, a frequency that resonates in your own chest, calming, steadying, grounding. Here in the East End, the night is a sovereign ruler, and its law is silence, a law obeyed by the stones and the shadows and the souls alike. The journey through the rookeries is a journey into the heart of the night itself, a place where the shadows are deepest and the sleep is the most profound, a sanctuary of stillness carved out of the chaotic world. As you reach the end of the lane, the air feels just a little lighter, the oppression of the buildings easing slightly, but the feeling of the heavy, peaceful dark remains with you, a cloak of calm that you wear as you move further into the sleeping city. The abyss is not a void. It is a vessel, holding the dreams of the multitude, keeping them safe until the morning comes, and you leave it undisturbed, stepping softly, breathing slowly, carrying the quiet with you. Leaving the heavy silence of the crowded rookeries behind, we lift our gaze upward, toward the jagged silhouette of the rooftops where the chimney pots stand like dark sentinels against the night sky, watching over a city that breathes smoke even in its sleep. High above the cobblestones, where the air is thinner and colder, there exists a separate world of shadows and ash, a domain that belongs to the smallest and most invisible inhabitants of London, the climbing boys who are more spirit than flesh, children who have traded the sunlight for the eternal twilight of the flu. In the stillness of the pre-dawn hour, long before the sun has even thought to crest the horizon, the city is already preparing to wake, and the first sign of this waking is the subtle movement of these tiny figures, ghosts in rags who slip through the back alleys and the service entrances, carrying their brushes and their blankets like soldiers marching to a silent front. The air here smells different. It does not smell of the river or the damp earth. It smells of carbon and old fires, a dry and acrid scent that coats the back of the throat and clings to the clothes, a reminder that in this era, fire is the only heart that beats within the cold brick chests of the houses. Imagine the texture of the soot, soft as velvet but heavy as lead, a black snow that never melts, falling silently in the dark spaces behind the walls, covering everything in a layer of fine, dark dust that muffles sound and absorbs the light. These boys are the masters of tight spaces. Their world is defined by the width of a brick chimney, a narrow vertical tunnel that stretches up toward the patch of gray sky far above, a claustrophobic passage that demands a calm mind and a steady hand. They move with a fluid, practiced grace, knees and elbows finding purchase on the rough masonry, climbing upward into the throat of the house, disappearing from the world of the living into a hollow column of darkness where the only sound is the scratch of the brush and the slow, rhythmic breathing of their own lungs. It is a lonely ascent, a journey into the blackest part of the night, where the eyes are useless and the hands must see for them, feeling for the ledges and the curves of the architecture, mapping the hidden veins of the building by touch alone. To be a chimney sweep in this time is to be intimate with the skeleton of the city, to know the twists and turns of the flues better than the architects who designed them, to live inside the walls while the wealthy families sleep unknowingly in the warm beds just inches away. There is a strange, meditative quality to their work, a forced quietness that comes from being enveloped by the stone, a silence so profound that it seems to press against the ears, broken only by the falling of the soot, a soft, whispering cascade that rains down past them into the grate below. The cold of the morning is biting, penetrating through the thin layers of their tattered clothes. But inside the chimney, there is a residual warmth, the fading memory of yesterday's fire trapped in the bricks, a faint and ghostly heat that offers a small comfort in the dark. They are the guardians of the hearth, the ones who ensure that the smoke can rise and the fires can burn, yet they remain unseen, their faces masked by the very grime they clear away, their eyes shining white and bright from within a canvas of absolute black. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the calmness required to exist in such a space, the way the panic must be pushed down and replaced by a steady, methodical rhythm, climb and sweep, a repetition that becomes a lullaby of labor. The city outside is vast and chaotic, but in the flue, the world is small and simple, a vertical path that leads only up or down, a singular direction that focuses the mind and clears the thoughts. Occasionally, they might emerge at the very top, popping their heads out of the chimney pot like small, soot-covered birds, looking out over the sea of slate roofs that stretches to the horizon, seeing the first gray light of dawn touching the dome of St. Paul's, a private view of the empire that belongs only to them and the pigeons. Up here, the air is fresher, the wind carries the salt of the estuary, and for a brief moment, they are kings of the city, looking down on the streets that are still lost in the fog, detached from the misery of the ground, suspended in the space between the earth and the sky. But they do not linger, for the work is never done, and they descend back into the darkness, sliding down the ropes, their movements controlled and silent, leaving the flues clean for another day of burning coal. It is a life of contrasts, of the blackest soot and the whitest sheets they must never touch, of the freezing streets and the warm chimneys, of being essential to the city's survival, yet completely ignored by its people. The tools of their trade are simple, the cane rods that screw together, the stiff bristle brushes, the scraping knives, objects that have been worn smooth by years of use, extensions of their own small arms. When they walk through the streets, people step aside, not out of respect, but out of fear of the black dust that radiates from them, creating a buffer of empty space around them, a bubble of isolation that travels with them wherever they go. Yet, in this story, we see them not with pity, but with a quiet reverence for their endurance, for the way they navigate a world that was not built for them, finding a way to survive in the harshest of conditions. The soot settles on their skin like a second layer, entering the pores, becoming part of who they are, a permanent mark of their trade that no amount of scrubbing can fully erase, identifying them as the children of the shadow. They sleep in the cellars of the master sweepers, on sacks filled with the very soot they have collected, curling up together like puppies for warmth, a pile of sleeping limbs and tired breathing, finding comfort in their shared existence. The dreamscape of a chimney sweep must be a strange place, filled with endless tunnels and falling ash. But perhaps they also dream of green fields and open skies, of a world where the air is clear and the walls do not close in. As the city begins to stir, as the milk wagons rattle on the stones and the newsboys begin to shout, the sweeps are often finishing their first shifts, retreating back into the alleys as the sun rises, vanishing like the fog itself. There is a melancholy beauty in their disappearance, a fading away that leaves the city clean and ready for the day, a silent sacrifice that goes unacknowledged. The black dust they leave behind is the physical manifestation of the city's consumption, the residue of the warmth and the industry that powers the Victorian age, and these children are the carriers of that burden, bearing the weight of the empire's waste on their small shoulders. In the quiet of your own room, as you listen to this, Let the image of the soot falling soften into something peaceful, like black snow in a shaken snow globe. A slow, mesmerizing descent that covers the noise and the haste of the world. The chimney is a passage, a threshold between the domestic warmth of the home and the wild, open sky of the night. And the climbing boys are the gatekeepers of this threshold, moving between the two worlds with a silent familiarity. Their eyes have seen the secrets of the households, the hidden letters burned in the grate, the whispered conversations in the drawing rooms, but they keep these secrets, sealed in the silence of the soot. The tragedy of their lost innocence is real, but tonight, we focus on the stillness of their journey, the quiet dignity of their labor, the way they move without waking the house, lighter than air, softer than smoke. They are the spirits of the hearth, the small, dark angels who keep the fires burning, and as the story moves on, we leave them to their rest or their work, watching them fade into the backdrop of the brick and the mortar. The dust settles, the wind dies down, and the chimneys stand tall and clean against the brightening sky, silent monuments to the lost boys who know their insides by heart. The tear that tracks through the soot on a cheek is not just a sign of sadness, but a streak of humanity, a river cutting through the landscape of grime, proving that beneath the blackened exterior, there is a heart that still feels, a soul that still hopes. And so, the city breathes, inhaling the clean air through the lungs that these children have cleared, oblivious to the cost, while the sweeps retreat into the shadows, waiting for the night to return, for the darkness is their friend, the soot their blanket, and the chimney their silent, stony home. From the jagged skyline where the sweeps disappear into the clouds, our gaze falls heavily to the ground, settling upon the imposing brick fortresses that anchor the city's sorrow, the silent, walled worlds known as the workhouses. These are not places of chaos, but of rigid, unyielding order, where the rhythm of life is dictated not by the rising sun or the turning tide, but by the hollow tolling of a bell that echoes through the long, whitewashed corridors, signaling the start of another day within the machine. To stand before the gates of a Victorian workhouse is to stand before a monument to austerity. The walls are high and insurmountable, built of stone that seems to have absorbed the cold of 1,000 winters, designed not merely to keep people in, but to remind those outside that poverty is a destination from which there is often no return. The heavy iron gates swing open with a groan of metal on metal, a sound that resonates deep in the chest, admitting the weary and the broken into a sanctuary that feels more like a prison, where the price of a bed and a meal is the surrender of one's own name. Inside, the air is still and stagnant, smelling of boiled cabbage and carbolic soap, a sterile scent that scrubs away the rich, organic odors of the London streets, replacing the chaos of life with the dull ache of existence. The floors are scrubbed raw, the wood bleached white by the constant friction of brushes, reflecting the pale light that filters through the high, barred windows. Windows that offer no view of the street, only a square of indifferent gray sky. Life here is a grinding wheel, a slow, repetitive cycle that turns without ceasing, wearing down the edges of the individual until everyone fits the same mold, dressed in the same coarse, scratchy wool uniforms that itch against the skin and erase all distinction of class or history. Men go one way, women another, children a third, families pulled apart by the invisible gravity of the rules, leaving only the memory of their connection to warm them in the lonely hours of the night. Imagine the sound of the workroom, a vast hall filled with the quiet rustle of labor, where the old men sit in rows, their hands gnarled and tough, picking apart old ropes to make oakum. It is a hypnotic task, the fibers resisting the fingers, the dust rising in the shafts of sunlight like motes of gold, a task that requires no thought, only the endless, rhythmic motion of the hands, tear and pull, until the mind detaches from the body and floats away. The silence in this room is heavy, a tangible weight that presses down on the shoulders, broken only by the occasional cough or the scrape of a boot on the floorboards, a silence that is enforced by the watchful eyes of the masters who pace the perimeter. There is a meditative quality to this monotony, a trance induced by the sheer repetition of the work, where the hours stretch out like taffy, pulling thin and long, blurring the distinction between morning and afternoon. In the stone yards, the younger men break rocks, the clack-clack-clack of the hammers forming a percussion section for the symphony of the poor, a steady, driving beat that marks the passage of time more accurately than any clock. This is the price of bread in the city of empire, a transaction where sweat and obedience are traded for a bowl of thin gruel and a crust of stale loaf. The dining hall is a cavernous space, the ceiling lost in the shadows above, the long wooden tables scarred by generations of spoons, where the inmates gather to eat in silence, their eyes fixed on the meager portions before them. Hunger here is not a sharp pang, but a dull, constant companion, a hollowness in the center of the body that becomes as familiar as a heartbeat, slowing the movements, dimming the eyes, turning the act of eating into a solemn ritual. The spoon scraping against the bottom of the wooden bowl is a lonely sound, a plea for just one more drop of sustenance, a sound that echoes off the bare walls and fades into the rafters. Yet, even in this bleakness, there is a quiet dignity, a resilience that refuses to be extinguished, seen in the way a mother might secretly pass a crumb of bread to a child across the aisle, a small, rebellious act of love that defies the iron laws of the institution. As the daylight begins to fade, draining the color from the already gray world of the workhouse, the bell tolls again, signaling the end of the labor and the beginning of the long, dark night. The gas lamps are lit, casting long, flickering shadows that dance on the walls, transforming the severe architecture into something softer, more mysterious, as the inmates shuffle toward the dormitories. The sleeping quarters are vast and drafty, rows of iron cots lined up with military precision, each one separated by a few feet of cold floor, a landscape of sleeping bodies wrapped in thin blankets. The air grows cooler as the fires are banked for the night, and the smell of the unwashed bodies mixes with the dampness of the stone, creating a heavy, human atmosphere that is strangely comforting in its density. Lying in the dark, staring up at the invisible ceiling, the mind is finally free to wander, escaping the high walls and the locked gates, traveling back to the streets of childhood, to the green fields of memory, to the faces of loved ones who have been lost to the grinding wheel. The breathing of the room becomes a collective rhythm, a slow, rising and falling tide of air that unites the strangers in their sleep, a shared vulnerability that softens the harshness of the waking hours. Sleep is the only true possession left to them, the only time when they are not paupers or inmates, but simply people, floating in the same vast ocean of dreams that holds the queen in her palace and the banker in his mansion. The silence of the workhouse at night is different from the silence of the streets. It is a contained silence, a pressurized quiet that holds the secrets and the sorrows of 1,000 lives within its brick embrace. Outside, the wind might howl against the corners of the building, rattling the window panes, but inside, the order holds. The routine pauses but does not break, waiting patiently for the dawn to restart the machine. There is a melancholy beauty in this endurance, in the way the human spirit adapts to the shape of its container, finding ways to survive, to dream, to hope, even when the world has turned its back. The moon tracks its path across the sky, its pale light slipping through the bars to paint stripes of silver on the floor, illuminating the sleeping faces, smoothing away the lines of worry and hunger, restoring a temporary innocence to the weary. The workhouse is a ship sailing through the night, carrying its cargo of lost souls through the darkness, guided by the indifferent stars, moving slowly toward a tomorrow that will look exactly like today. You can feel the heaviness of the stone, the solidity of the structure, a permanence that stands in contrast to the fragility of the lives inside, a reminder that the institutions of the city are built to last, while the people are merely passing through. The grinding wheel slows to a halt in these midnight hours. The friction ceases, and for a brief time, there is peace, a respite from the struggle, a suspension of the rules. In this quiet, you can hear the heart of the building, the settling of the timbers, the groaning of the pipes, the whisper of the draft under the door, the small, unnoticed sounds that make up the texture of the night. It is a place of shadows and echoes, where the past hangs heavy in the air, where the ghosts of those who came before seem to stand watch over the living, a silent brotherhood of the poor. As the sleep story deepens, the image of the workhouse fades, the high walls dissolve into the mist, the hard beds become soft clouds, and the hunger is replaced by a sense of fullness, a spiritual nourishment that comes from the simple act of resting. The struggle for survival is put on hold, the price of bread is forgotten, and all that remains is the slow, steady breathing of the night, the comfort of the dark, the promise of rest. The grinding wheel has stopped, the bell is silent, and the workhouse sleeps, a giant, stone beast slumbering in the heart of the city, holding its breath until the morning comes. While the heavy doors of the workhouse remain barred against the night, sealing in the cold reality of survival, there are other doors in this city that swing open with a welcoming ease, inviting the weary to step out of the fog and into a world of artificial warmth and golden illusion. We leave the silent, stony austerity behind and move toward the hum of the busy thoroughfares, where the gas lamps burn with a fiercer intensity, casting a vibrant, hissing light that pushes back the shadows and creates a theatrical stage for the night's other inhabitants, the seekers of oblivion who trade their pennies for a moment of forgetting. The streets here are slick with rain, acting as mirrors that reflect the blazing facades of the gin palaces, those ornate temples of glass and mahogany that rise up from the grime like glowing jewels, promising a temporary kingdom to anyone with a coin in their pocket. As you approach, the air changes, losing the smell of coal and gaining the sharp, juniper scent of spirits mixed with the warm breath of 100 conversations, a sensory invitation that pulls you toward the etched glass windows. Inside, the world is a kaleidoscope of light, the gas jets singing in their crystal globes, illuminating the polished brass rails and the vast mirrors that stretch from floor to ceiling, multiplying the crowd until it seems like an endless sea of humanity seeking shelter from the damp London chill. The noise here is not a roar but a steady, rhythmic thrum, a collective murmur of voices that blends into a comforting background static, the sound of stories being told and burdens being laid down, if only for the length of a glass. You can see the condensation running down the cold windows, blurring the view of the street outside, effectively erasing the world of work and hardship, leaving only this capsule of brightness where the light is always golden and the cold never penetrates. The barmaids move with a hypnotic efficiency, pouring the clear liquid that they call the water of life, their movements synchronized with the clinking of glasses and the shuffling of boots on the sawdust-covered floor, a dance of commerce and comfort played out under the watchful gaze of the clock, that no one seems to check. The wood of the bar is smooth and worn warm by the touch of countless hands. Hands that are rough from labor, but here, in this light, they relax, the fingers uncurling, the tension seeping out of the muscles as the warmth of the room wraps around them like a heavy coat. It is a place of escape, a sanctuary where the poor can feel rich for an hour, surrounded by the faux grandeur of velvet curtains and gilded plaster, a stage set designed to make the grim reality of the Victorian night disappear. But we do not linger here, for there is a deeper quiet to be found, a more profound escape that lies further into the labyrinth, away from the bright glare of the Gin Palace, and into the shadowed alleyways where the gaslight struggles to reach. We drift down the narrow, twisting lanes of the East End, where the buildings lean close and the fog collects in the corners, moving toward a different kind of sanctuary, one that does not announce itself with lights and mirrors, but hides behind a nondescript door, marked only by a subtle, sweet scent that hangs in the air. This is the entrance to the Opium Den, a place of stillness and slow time, where the frantic pace of the city is slowed to a crawl, and the sharp edges of consciousness are softened into a hazy, dreamlike blur. You step across the threshold and descend a narrow flight of wooden stairs, the wood creaking softly underfoot, leading you down away from the street level, down into the earth, into a burrow of silence where the air is thick and heavy, smelling of burnt sugar and ancient wood. The room opens up before you, dimly lit by the glow of small oil lamps that cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, revealing a space draped in faded tapestries and heavy curtains that absorb every sound, creating a muffled cocoon of quiet. Low wooden bunks line the walls, stacked one above the other, filled with the reclining figures of the dreamers, men and women who have left their bodies behind to travel into the landscapes of their own minds, their eyes half closed, their breathing slow and shallow. The atmosphere is thick, almost liquid, the smoke curling in lazy spirals from the long bamboo pipes, rising to the ceiling where it hangs like a gray cloud, filtering the light and turning the room into a sepia-toned photograph of tranquility. There is no urgency here, no schedules, no demands. Only the slow ritual of the preparation, the heating of the treacle-like substance over the flame, the deep inhalation, and the long, slow release of the breath that carries the soul away from the misery of the London winter. To watch this scene is to witness a profound stillness, a suspension of life where the worries of debt and hunger and cold are dissolved in the sweet, cloying smoke, replaced by visions of gardens and palaces and sunlight that never fades. The keeper of the den moves like a phantom through the haze, tending to the lamps and the pipes with silent, respectful movements, a guardian of the sleep who ensures that the spell remains unbroken. You can feel the heaviness of the air pressing against your skin, a physical weight that urges you to lie down, to close your eyes, to let the gravity of the room pull you into its embrace, to become just another shadow in this gallery of dreams. The only sound is the soft bubbling of the pipes and the occasional rustle of cloth as a sleeper shifts, sounds that are magnified by the silence until they become the heartbeat of the room, a slow, rhythmic pulse that mimics the sensation of falling asleep. It is a world within a world, a secret pocket of the city where the laws of Victorian morality do not apply, where the only currency is the ability to dream, and the only goal is to escape the grinding reality of the streets above. The shadows here are not frightening. They are comforting, wrapping around the sleepers like a blanket, hiding them from the judgment of the day, offering a privacy that is impossible to find in the crowded tenements. As you stand in the center of the room, breathing in the scented air, you feel a drowsiness washing over you, a sympathetic response to the deep relaxation of the people around you, a contagion of calm that slows your own heart and heavies your eyelids. The colors of the room are muted and rich, deep reds and browns and golds that seem to glow in the half-light, creating a visual warmth that complements the physical warmth of the underground chamber. This is the dark underbelly of the city, yes, but tonight it feels like a womb, a place of safety and suspension where the harshness of the outside world cannot enter. The city above continues its ceaseless churn, the carriages rattling and the factories smoking. But down here, time has stopped, trapped in the amber of the opium smoke, preserving the moment in an eternal, languid present. The stories of these sleepers are written on their relaxed faces, lines of worry smoothed out, mouths slightly open, hands resting loosely at their sides. Travelers who have embarked on a journey that requires no movement, voyagers of the inner sea. The gaslight from the street filters down through a great eye on the wall, a pale, distant reminder of the surface, but it is ignored, irrelevant to the reality of the den. The connection between the gin palace and the opium den is the desire for peace, the universal human need to step out of the storm and find a quiet harbor, whether that harbor is built of bright glass or dark smoke. As the narrative drifts, we leave the den, floating back up the stairs, but carrying the heaviness with us, the sensation of that thick, quiet air lingering in the mind, a reminder that sleep is the ultimate escape, the natural version of the peace that these souls seek in the pipe and the bottle. The street outside seems quieter now. The fog has thickened, wrapping the city in its own version of the opium haze, blurring the lamps and muffling the footsteps, turning the entire metropolis into a dreamscape where anything is possible and nothing is quite real. The night is a vast ocean, and we are all drifting on its currents, moving from the light to the dark, from the noise to the silence, seeking that final, perfect stillness where the story ends and the dream begins. The gaslights flicker, the shadows lengthen, and the city breathes its slow, deep breath, inhaling the fog and exhaling the quiet, a cycle that continues through the hours of darkness, watching over the sinners and the saints alike as they find their way to rest. From the hazy, drug-induced slumber of the opium dens, we step out into a different kind of darkness, a crisp and biting air that heralds the arrival of a season that will stain the pages of history forever. The summer heat has broken, washing away the humidity, but leaving behind a tension that settles deep in the bones of the city, marking the beginning of the autumn of 1888, a time when the leaves in the parks turn the color of dried blood and the wind from the east carries a chill that no coat can truly block. We find ourselves in Whitechapel, the tangled heart of the East End, a district that is not merely a place on a map, but a living, breathing creature of brick and shadow, a labyrinth of narrow alleys and courtyards that twist and turn upon themselves like a knot that cannot be untied. The gas lamps here seem to burn with a nervous energy, their flames jittering inside the glass cases, casting long, frantic shadows that leap across the wet cobblestones, and every flickering light creates a dozen new hiding places for the things that go bump in the night. It is late August, moving into September, and the atmosphere in the streets has shifted from the usual weary trudge of poverty to something sharper, something more electric, a collective holding of breath that spans from the docks to the church spires. The fog is still here, our constant companion in this journey, but in this season it feels predatory, thick and yellow and clinging, wrapping around the street corners like a shroud, obscuring the vision and muffling the cries of the city. You are walking down Bucks Row, a street that feels forgotten by the rest of the world, where the warehouses loom like cliffs on either side, blocking out the moonlight, and leaving only the narrow strip of the road illuminated by the distant, haloed lamps. The silence is profound, but it is not the peaceful silence of the countryside. It is a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that falls before a storm or before a predator strikes, a quiet that is filled with the invisible eyes of the city watching from behind twitching curtains. This is the hunting ground of a phantom, a figure who has not yet been named by the press, but whose presence is already felt in the cold wind that sweeps through the archways, a man who is less flesh and blood and more a manifestation of the city's own dark subconscious. Imagine the sound of footsteps echoing on the stones, a slow, deliberate cadence that draws closer and then fades away, leaving you to wonder if it was a constable on his beat or something else, something that does not wish to be seen. The women of Whitechapel, the weary souls who walk these streets in search of a bed for the night, pull their thin shawls tighter around their shoulders, their eyes darting nervously toward the mouth of every alley, sensing a change in the air, a vibration of danger that hums beneath the surface of the ordinary night. The first tragedy strikes not with a roar, but with a sudden, brutal quiet, a discovery made in the gray light of the pre-dawn that shatters the illusion of safety, sending a ripple of shock through the neighborhood that moves faster than the telegraph. You can feel the shift in the city's rhythm, the way the casual conversations in the market stop abruptly, replaced by hushed whispers and meaningful glances, the way the doors are bolted a little earlier, the way the shadows seem to lengthen and deepen as the sun goes down. This is the beginning of the panic, a slow creeping dread that infiltrates the mind, making every stranger look like a suspect, making every dark corner a potential trap. The name Jack has not yet been written in red letters, but the entity is there, a silhouette in a top hat and a long coat, disappearing around the corner just as you turn your head, a ghost story that has suddenly become real. The police whistles shrill through the night, a piercing sound that cuts through the fog, signaling that another poor soul has met the darkness, and the heavy boots of the constables pound on the pavement, running toward a scene that they will never forget. But the streets are empty when they arrive, the fog reclaiming its secrets. There is a cinematic quality to this terror, a visual language of stark contrasts, the deep black of the shadows against the pale, sickly yellow of the gaslight, the red of the brick against the gray of the sky, a palette of gloom that paints a picture of isolation. You walk past the Ten Bells pub, where the noise and the laughter spill out onto the street. But even here, the gaiety feels forced, a desperate attempt to drown out the fear that waits just outside the door, the patrons drinking to forget that the night is long and the way home is dark. The newsboys will soon be shouting the headlines, their voices ringing out in the morning air, spreading the tale of the Whitechapel murders. But for now, in the deep of the night, there is only the rumor, the fear, the unknown. The killer is a part of the city. He is the smoke from the chimneys. He is the damp on the walls. He is the cold in the air. He is nowhere, and he is everywhere, a dark legend being born in real time. As you listen to the city breathe, you realize that the terror is not just about the violence. It is about the vulnerability, the realization that the walls of the houses are thin and the locks are weak, and that safety is an illusion that can be broken by a single shadow. The autumn leaves drift across the pavement, scratching softly against the stone, sounding like whispering voices, like the ghosts of the past trying to speak, trying to warn the living. The sensation of being watched is palpable, a prickle on the back of the neck, a feeling that draws the gaze upward to the dark windows where a candle flickers and dies, plunging a room into blackness. Yet, there is a strange distance to this fear for us. Walking through the memory of the city, we are observers protected by time, safe in the knowledge that this is a story that has already been told, a nightmare that has ended, allowing us to feel the mood without the danger. The fog swirls around the lampposts, creating halos of moisture, diffusing the light until the street looks like a painting by a master who used only shades of gray and black, a masterpiece of atmosphere. The police lanterns cut beams through the mist, searching, always searching, sweeping over the rough brickwork and the wooden fences, looking for a clue that will never be found, for a face that will never be identified. This is the mystery that will never be solved, the question mark that hangs over the city, and that lack of resolution adds to the dreamlike quality of the narrative, leaving the mind to wander in the spaces between the facts. The terror of the autumn is a cold, metallic taste in the air, a sharpening of the senses, a heightening of the awareness that makes every sound distinct: the distant bark of a dog, the rattle of a carriage wheel, the chime of a church clock striking the quarter hour. Whitechapel becomes a stage, and the people are the players in a tragedy they did not choose, moving through the sets of Hanbury Street and Dorset Street, their lives intersecting with the darkness for one brief, terrible moment. The fear brings the community together in a strange way. Neighbors checking on neighbors, strangers walking together for safety, a huddled mass of humanity seeking warmth against the cold wind of the unknown. As the story unfolds, the nights seem to get longer, the darkness stretching out to swallow the day, the sun retreating earlier and rising later, as if the sky itself is afraid to look down upon the streets. The silence returns after the whistles fade, a heavier silence now, weighted with grief and suspicion, a silence that presses against the ears and demands to be heard. You are drifting through the epicenter of the legend, walking the same stones where the history was written, but the violence is gone, leaving only the mood, the atmosphere, the residue of the emotion that was felt so intensely all those years ago. The gaslight hisses, a serpentine sound that mimics the tension, and the shadows dance a slow waltz on the walls, mimicking the movements of the unseen. It is a time of secrets, of hidden lives exposed to the public gaze, of a city forced to look at its own reflection in the mirror of the tragedy and not liking what it sees. The autumn wind blows the fog into swirling eddies, creating shapes that look like figures for a fleeting second before dissolving back into nothingness, playing tricks on the tired eyes. This is the true power of the Ripper story, not the blood, but the shadow, the idea that the monster could be anyone, the man passing you on the street, the lodger in the room upstairs, the face in the crowd. And so we walk on, deeper into the autumn, deeper into the mystery, wrapped in the safety of the sleep story, feeling the chill of the history, but warmed by the comfort of our own beds, leaving the terror in the past where it belongs. The city sleeps with one eye open, the fear becoming a lullaby that warns of the dark, but also sings of the resilience of those who lived through it, the people who woke up every morning and carried on despite the shadow. The night settles completely now, the panic subsiding into a dull ache, a memory of fear rather than the sharp edge of it, and Whitechapel rests, uneasy but enduring, waiting for the dawn to chase the shadows back into the corners. The first act of the autumn drama is over. The stage is set for the paranoia that will follow, but for tonight, the curtain falls, the lights dim, and the silence reclaims the streets, leaving only the fog and the memory of the footsteps fading into the distance. The physical shadows of the street have now crept into the minds of the people, turning the very air of London into a soup of suspicion where the fog is no longer just weather, but a manifestation of the collective fear. The silence of the aftermath has been broken not by a scream, but by the scratching of a pen, a sound that is small and dry yet echoes louder than the police whistles across the cobblestones. marking the moment when the terror shifted from the physical to the psychological. We enter the dusty, ink-stained offices of the Central News Agency, a place usually filled with the mundane reports of politics and trade, but now the air is thick with a new kind of electricity, a tension that radiates from a single piece of paper lying on a cluttered desk. Imagine the smell of the room, the scent of old paper and tobacco smoke, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that cut through the grime of the windows, illuminating the red ink that looks disturbingly like fresh blood. This is the era of the letter, the time when the written word is the primary vessel of communication, and suddenly, the monster has a voice, a taunting, jeering voice that speaks from the shadows and mocks the order of the empire. The police, the stoic guardians of the peace, stand around the desk in Scotland Yard, their heavy wool uniforms damp from the night's patrol, their faces etched with a frustration that borders on despair, staring down at the handwriting that claims to be from the hand that holds the knife. The name Jack has been signed with a flourish, a moniker that will travel around the world and down through the centuries. But in this moment, it is just a name, a label attached to the phantom, giving form to the shapeless dread that has gripped the city. Paranoia spreads through the streets like a contagion, faster than the cholera of the past, infecting the rich in their carriages and the poor in their tenements alike, erasing the lines of class and uniting the city in a shared, shivering anxiety. Every man carrying a black bag is suddenly a suspect. Every doctor, every butcher, every stranger who walks a little too quietly is watched by 100 eyes peering from behind the curtains. The trust that holds a community together begins to fray. The neighbor looks at the neighbor with suspicion. The shopkeeper watches his customers with a wary eye, and the simple act of walking home becomes a gauntlet of fear. You can hear the change in the sound of the city. The footsteps are hurried and sharp. The conversations are hushed and urgent. The laughter has died away, replaced by the murmuring of rumors that grow wilder with every retelling. The newspapers fan the flames, their headlines screaming in bold black type, carried by the newsboys whose voices are shrill and piercing in the morning air, selling the panic for a penny a sheet. The letters continue to arrive, some clearly hoaxes written by those seeking a twisted kind of fame, others bearing a chilling authenticity that makes the detective's blood run cold, creating a labyrinth of paper and ink that leads nowhere. The famous From Hell letter arrives, not with a flourish, but with a grim little box, a tangible piece of the horror that creates a physical sickness in the hearts of those who see it. A reminder that this is not a story in a book, but a living, breathing nightmare. Yet, as we drift through this historical memory, we observe it from a distance, safely separated by the veil of time, watching the panic as one watches a storm from behind a thick pane of glass. The gaslights in the police station hiss and sputter, casting long shadows that seem to stretch and grasp like fingers, reflecting the exhaustion of the men who are trying to catch a ghost with a net. They pin maps to the walls, marking the spots where the tragedies occurred, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. But the red pins only form a constellation of failure, a map of a city that cannot protect its own. The vigilance committees are formed, groups of local men who take the law into their own hands, marching through the fog with heavy boots and grim faces, their torches cutting through the gloom, trying to reclaim their streets from the darkness. You can hear the rhythm of their patrols, a steady, heavy beat that contrasts with the silent, slippery movements of the one they hunt, a clash of the visible and the invisible. The fear is a heavy blanket that smothers the East End, dampening the spirit, making the simple joys of life feel distant and impossible, turning the autumn into a season of waiting, waiting for the next letter, the next headline, the next blow. But there is also a strange quietude in this paranoia, a heightened state of awareness where every sense is tuned to the environment, where the rustle of a rat in the straw or the banging of a shutter in the wind becomes a significant event. The postman becomes a figure of dread, the bringer of bad news, his arrival anticipated with a mixture of hope and terror, as the police wait for the slip of paper that might finally give them the key. The ink dries, the paper yellows, but the feeling remains, a vibration in the air that hums with the question of identity, the eternal who that will never be answered. In the coffee houses and the pubs, the theories are spun like spider webs, complex and fragile, connecting the highborn to the low, the royal to the insane, every man becoming an amateur detective in a case that defies logic. The city feels under siege, not by an army, but by an idea, the idea that safety is a lie and that the walls of the home are no barrier to the evil that walks the streets. As the night deepens in our story, the frantic energy of the panic begins to slow down, settling into a deep, melancholic groove, a realization that the mystery is part of the fabric of the city now. The police officers rub their tired eyes. The ink on the letters seems to blur in the dim light, and the shouts of the newsboys fade into the distance, leaving only the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. The paranoia becomes a lullaby of sorts, a repetitive cycle of fear and relief, a rhythm that mimics the beating of a heart. We see the detectives sitting in the smoke-filled rooms of Scotland Yard, defeated by the lack of clues, their minds clouded by the fog of the investigation, drifting into a restless sleep in their chairs, dreaming of a culprit they can touch and hold. The "Dear Boss" letter sits on the desk, an artifact of terror that has lost its power to hurt us now, becoming just another piece of history, a relic of a time when the world seemed darker and more dangerous. The streets of Whitechapel are empty now. The vigilantes have gone home to their beds. The doors are bolted tight, and the city waits for a dawn that feels far away. The fear has exhausted itself, leaving behind a heavy, drowsy silence, the kind of silence that follows a long bout of weeping, a silence that invites sleep. The ink is dry, the pen is laid down, and the letters from hell have been read and filed away, disappearing into the archives of the past. The paranoia fades into a dull ache, a memory of a time when the city held its breath, and now we can exhale, letting the tension leave the body, letting the shoulders drop, letting the mind drift away from the red ink and the black headlines. The fog rolls back in, covering the tracks, covering the secrets, softening the edges of the fear until it is nothing more than a story told in the dark. The police station quiets down, the gaslights are lowered, and the detectives sleep, chasing the phantom in their dreams, while the city outside continues its slow, steady breathing. The questions remain, but tonight they do not need answers. They only need to be acknowledged as part of the tapestry of the night. The letters are just paper now, fragile and old, unable to harm, unable to scare, just whispers from a bygone era that drift away like smoke. And so the chapter of paranoia closes, not with a solution, but with a surrender to the mystery, a letting go of the need to know, a sinking into the comfort of the unknown. The city sleeps, the letters sleep, and the terror becomes a dream, fading, until there is nothing left but the peace of the heavy, silent night. The ink on the taunting letters has dried, and the paper has yellowed, but the stain of fear they left behind has seeped into the very foundations of Scotland Yard, turning the headquarters of justice into a house of quiet desperation. As we leave the realm of the written word and step into the physical world of the investigation, we find ourselves in the high-ceilinged rooms of the police station, where the air is thick with the smell of stale tobacco smoke and wet wool, a heavy, masculine scent that hangs low over the desks like the fog hangs over the river. The mood here is not one of frantic action, but of a slow, grinding exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from chasing a phantom that leaves no footprints, a ghost that walks through walls and vanishes into the mist. Inspector Aberline and his men are statues of fatigue, their eyes rimmed with red, their uniforms heavy on their shoulders, moving through the station with the slow, deliberate motions of men wading through deep water. The gaslights hiss overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor on their faces, illuminating the lines of worry and the shadows of doubt that have etched themselves into their skin over the long, sleepless nights of the autumn. On the walls, the large maps of Whitechapel are pinned up, a labyrinth of lines and names that should make sense, that should offer a pattern, but tonight they look only like a chaotic web spun by a spider they cannot see. The detectives stare at these maps as if by sheer force of will they can make the red pins speak, as if they can force the paper to reveal the secret route the killer took, but the maps remain silent, indifferent to the frustration of the law. Outside the station, the city is a wall of gray. The fog has thickened to a degree that makes the simple act of looking across the street an impossibility, blinding the eyes of justice and wrapping the criminal in a cloak of invisibility. It is a blindness that frustrates the soul, a feeling of being impotent against the elements, as if the weather itself is conspiring with the darkness to hide the truth. The constables are sent out on their beats, stepping out of the relative warmth of the station into the biting chill, their boots striking the pavement with a rhythmic, heavy clatter that echoes off the brick walls, a sound that is meant to reassure but only serves to announce their presence to anyone hiding in the shadows. We follow one of these officers as he walks his lonely patrol, his lantern swinging at his side, casting a small, bobbing circle of light that reveals nothing but the swirling mist and the damp stones. He stops at every corner, listening, straining his ears against the muffled silence of the night, hoping to hear a footstep, a rustle of fabric, a breath that doesn't belong. But all he hears is the dripping of the condensation from the eaves and the distant, mournful horn of a boat on the Thames. The pressure to make an arrest is a physical weight, a burden that sits on the chest of every man in the force, driving them to see suspicion in the most innocent of faces. In this atmosphere of paranoia, mistakes are made. The net is cast wide and pulls in the wrong fish. Men who are guilty only of being poor or strange or in the wrong place at the wrong time. We see the holding cells, where the unfortunate suspects sit in the gloom, confusion and fear in their eyes. Men like the Leather Apron, who were demons in the press, but are just ordinary souls in the harsh light of the police station. There is a tragedy in these errors, a sense of flailing in the dark, of striking out at shadows because the true target is unreachable. The detectives know this. Deep down they know that the man they seek is not the trembling wretch in the cell, but someone else, someone colder, someone who is watching them from the safety of the fog. The interrogation rooms are quiet now. The questions have all been asked, the alibis checked and rechecked, and the silence that follows is heavy with the realization of failure. It is a slow, reflective failure, not a sudden defeat, but a gradual erosion of hope, like the slow wearing away of a stone by the river. The inspector sits at his desk, his head in his hands, the paperwork spread out before him like a sea of whitecaps, reports and witness statements that contradict each other, descriptions that do not match, a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He closes his eyes, and for a moment, he is walking the streets himself, trying to think like the killer, trying to understand the mind that can commit such acts and then disappear so completely. But the mind of the Ripper is a locked room, and the key has been thrown into the deepest part of the Thames. The fog outside presses against the window panes, a white face looking in, mocking the efforts of the science and the logic that the Victorian era holds so dear. This is the ultimate frustration of the time, the clash between the modern belief in order and the ancient, chaotic reality of the human heart. The police have their whistles and their truncheons and their telegraphs, but against the silent, shifting fog and the knife in the dark, they are powerless. The sensation of the killer escaping is visceral, a feeling of slipping, like sand through fingers, a presence that was just there, just around the corner, just out of reach. They arrive at a scene only minutes too late. The stones still wet, the air still disturbed, but the street is empty. The only witness is the mist that swirls in the wake of a departing figure. It is a game of ghosts, a chase that has no finish line, and tonight, the exhaustion has won. The station begins to settle into an uneasy slumber, the frantic energy of the earlier hours dissipating into a dull ache. The men doze in their chairs, their chins resting on their chests, their dreams filled with dark alleys and endless staircases that lead nowhere. The sergeant at the desk rubs his eyes, the ink in the logbook blurring, the names of the night's arrests merging into a single list of the lost. There is a strange, melancholy beauty in this defeat, a resignation that brings with it a kind of peace, the peace of accepting that some things are beyond control. The city is too big, the shadows are too deep, and the fog is too thick. Justice is not just blind, it is lost, wandering in the whiteout, stumbling over the cobblestones, trying to find a way home. As the narrator of this memory, we watch them with compassion, these men who carry the weight of the city's safety, who are blamed for the terror they cannot stop. We see the buttons on their coats gleaming dully in the low light, the steam rising from a cup of cold tea, the dust motes dancing in the stillness. The urgency fades, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of the clock on the wall, ticking away the seconds of the night, measuring the time until the sun will rise and burn away the mist, if only for a little while. The telegraph machine falls silent, its clacking voice stilled, the connection to the outside world severed by the lateness of the hour. The cells are quiet, the prisoners asleep or staring into the dark, united with their captors in the shared prison of the night. The concept of the suspect dissolves, leaving only men, tired and cold, waiting for the shift to end. The fog acts as a dampener on all emotion, muting the anger, softening the fear, leaving only a gray, blank slate. The streets of London, usually the domain of the police, have been ceded to the unknown, and in that surrender, there is a release of tension. The hunt is over for tonight. The predator has retreated to his lair, and the hounds are too weary to follow. We drift away from the station, floating back out into the cool, damp air, leaving the frustration behind the brick walls. The feeling of the chase lingers, a ghost sensation in the limbs, but the mind begins to let go, to unclench, to accept the mystery. The blind justice is not a failure of will, but a condition of existence in this place of shadows. The eyes of the law are closed, not in ignorance, but in sleep, gathering strength for the next day, the next patrol, the next letter. The night wraps its arms around the yard, protecting it from its own shortcomings, hiding the maps and the files in the dark. The sound of the boots on the pavement fades into the distance, a fading heartbeat of the law, becoming part of the ambient noise of the sleeping city. The river flows on, indifferent to the crimes on its banks, and the fog holds the city in a tight, possessive embrace. Everything slows down, the thoughts, the movements, the pulse of the investigation. We are left with the image of the empty street, the swirling mist, and the silent, imposing building of Scotland Yard, a fortress of order that has been humbled by the chaos of the night. It is time to rest, to stop searching, to stop thinking, to let the fog cover everything in its soft, white oblivion. The story of the hunt pauses here, suspended in the amber of the night, waiting for a resolution that history tells us will never come. But for now, that does not matter. All that matters is the quiet, the heavy eyelids, the slow breath, and the deep, dreamless sleep that falls over the just and the unjust alike. The blindfold of the night is tied tight, and in the darkness there is peace. As the heavy doors of Scotland Yard close on the unsolvable puzzle, time begins its slow, relentless march forward, burying the secrets of the autumn under layers of frost and years, and we are left standing at the end of the era, looking back through the veil of history at a city that has become a ghost of itself. The panic that once gripped the throat of London has loosened its hold, dissolving like the morning mist under the rising sun of a new century, leaving behind only the scars and the stories, the echoes of a time when the night was a kingdom of fear. The autumn of terror fades into the bleakness of winter. The leaves rot on the wet pavement, and the snow begins to fall, covering the blood and the grime with a pristine blanket of white, a silence that seems to forgive the city for its sins. The figure of the Ripper, once a terrifying reality who walked among the living, slowly transforms into a shadow, a legend, a boogeyman who belongs to the realm of nightmares rather than the police reports. He vanished as he appeared, silently, without fanfare, slipping back into the void from which he came, leaving the sentence unfinished, the final chapter unwritten, a mystery that will torment the curious for generations to come. This lack of resolution is the true haunting, the open wound in the timeline that refuses to heal, a question mark that hangs over the East End like a permanent moon. As you listen to the city settle into the deepest part of the night, you can feel the weight of this unresolved history, a heaviness that gives the atmosphere a rich, melancholic texture. The Victorian world moves on. The Queen grows old and passes away. The empire shifts and changes, but the shadow of Whitechapel remains fixed, frozen in the amber of 1888. The gaslights are eventually replaced by the harsh glare of electricity. The horses are replaced by the roar of engines. But in the quiet corners, in the narrow alleys that have survived the wrecking ball, the spirit of the old London still lingers. It is a feeling of eternal twilight, a sense that if you turn the corner quickly enough, you might still catch a glimpse of a top hat or the swirl of a cape, a residual image burned into the retina of the city. The sorrow of the victims, the women who were forgotten by society until they became headlines, is now a soft, mournful note in the symphony of the streets, a reminder of the fragility of life in the face of the darkness. We look back not with fear, but with a deep, reflective sadness, a recognition of the human tragedy that played out on this stage of brick and stone. The paranoia that turned neighbor against neighbor has softened into a shared folklore, a dark fairy tale that is whispered to children, a story that binds the city together in its knowledge of the abyss. The fog that we have followed through this journey is now the fog of memory, thick and swirling, distorting the facts until they become something more than truth, something mythic and strange. The specific details of the crimes fade, the dates and the times blur, but the mood remains, that quintessential Victorian gloom that is both beautiful and terrifying. You are walking through a museum of shadows, where every cobblestone has a story to tell, where every brick has absorbed the smoke and the tears of the past. The silence of the present night is deepened by the silence of the past, a double layer of quiet that wraps around you like a heavy, warm quilt. The mystery of who he was does not matter anymore, for he has become the city itself, a manifestation of the poverty, the crowding, the desperation, and the darkness that defined the era. He is the shadow in the doorway, the draft in the hallway, the unexplained noise in the attic, the eternal other that watches from the dark. This lack of an ending allows the story to loop forever, a circle of time that never closes, keeping the Victorian night alive in our imaginations. The detectives have long since laid down their pens. The files are dusty and brittle, the evidence lost to time. But the feeling of the hunt, the anticipation, the dread, these things are preserved in the atmosphere. The eternal shadow is not a threat to you now. It is a companion, a presence that makes the safety of your own bed feel even sweeter, a contrast that highlights the peace of your own time. The echoes of the haunted era are faint now, like a radio signal drifting in from a distant station, barely audible over the static of the modern world. You can hear the phantom footsteps fading, walking away from you, further and further into the distance, until they are gone, leaving you alone in the comforting quiet. The city of London sleeps, its dreams filled with the ghosts of its past, but they are peaceful ghosts now, tired and faded, lacking the power to hurt. The darkness is no longer sharp, it is soft and velvet, a place of rest where the history books are closed and the lights are turned out. The tragedy has become art, the fear has become nostalgia, and the reality has become a dream. We leave the East End behind, letting the fog reclaim the streets, letting the secrets remain secret, respecting the silence of the dead. The river Thames flows on, dark and deep, carrying the memories of the city out to the boundless sea, washing away the pain, leaving only the water and the night. The story is done. The book is finished. The final period has been placed. There is nothing left to fear, nothing left to solve, nothing left to do but to let go. The weight of the Victorian era lifts from your shoulders, floating away like smoke, leaving you light and free. The eternal shadow merges with the natural darkness of your room, a protective cover that shields you from the waking world. You are safe, you are warm, you are at peace. The echoes have stopped. The era has ended. The city is still. Sleep now, in the quiet aftermath of the story, wrapped in the comfort of the knowable, the safe, and the calm. The night is yours, and it is peaceful.